I just closed the team meeting when I heard it, as unmistakable as glass shattering. Honestly, Claire, he said, voice low but carrying, I don't know why you bother with your money experiments. You have zero financial sense. We were still gathered around the whiteboard in the corner conference room, post-mortem slide on the screen, half-empty coffee cups on the table. I'd spent the last 20 minutes pitching my side project, a weekly newsletter, Insight and Retirement, where I distilled complex investment concepts into digestible emails, paired with personal stories from folks navigating their golden years. I'd proudly shown our first edition's open rate over 40%, thanks to the savvy graphics and nitty-gritty breakdown of bond yields versus dividend funds. But Dan, my UX lead turned finance skeptic, caught my gaze and shook his head. Index funds, dividend strategies, Roth conversions. You're not a CFP trademark. You're a designer who likes spreadsheets. You don't have the experience, the certifications. People trust advice from pros, not hobbyists. You're setting them up for mistakes. A hush fell. I could feel the warmth of 30 pairs of eyes on me. Maggie cleared her throat, clutching her latte. I thought that review was solid, Claire. Investors liked the flow. But Dan just exhaled sharply. I signed up because I'm curious. But if you can't even manage your own freelance budget, last month you maxed out your card. It's funny you give advice on retirement. My cheeks flushed. I did have a slip-up. A strike board project had exceeded its hours by 20%, and I'd covered the gap with credit until the client paid. But how did that invalidate what I'd built with Insight and Retirement? It felt like he was trying to shrink me back to the safe, hobbyist corner, like I had no right to speak on money, let alone retirement for our readership in their 50s and 60s. I clicked off the projector and tucked the remote in my bag. The others murmured their goodbyes and drifted away. Dan lingered at the door. Look, he said quietly, I don't mean to be harsh. Just be realistic. Finance is unforgiving. Then he left, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. I sat at the long oak table, heart pounding. My newsletter had been born from frustration. I'd wrestled with my own savings early in my career, puzzled by jargon, hungry for clear explanations. I spent weekends reading prospectuses, interviewing my grandparents on their retirement choices, and taking night classes in personal finance. After 6 months, I launched Insight and Retirement, and the response was unexpectedly enthusiastic. Subscribers telling me they finally understood compound interest, or felt brave enough to meet with a financial planner. If a skeptic like Dan doubted me, what about the wider world? I stared at my laptop's desktop shortcut, an orange envelope icon, labeled INR. The cursor hovered over it. I thought of the 500 readers who'd opened my second issue within the hour, and the dozen who'd replied with heartfelt thank yous. I thought of my grandmother, whose precise blue-inked handwriting I'd transcribed into a feature about choosing low-risk bonds. She'd mailed me her handwritten chart, showing 30 years of CDs and inflation rates. He'd said, knowledge is the best nest egg. I exhaled, closed the laptop, and headed to the coffee shop next door. I needed clarity. At noon, I set up at a corner table. The barista, Mia, slid over a cappuccino. Rough morning? She asked, eyes soft behind her mask. I offered a rueful smile. You could say that. I told her about Dan's comment, that I had no financial sense. She frowned. But your newsletter is everywhere I look. LinkedIn, Reddit, even my mom subscribed. You forced me to think about my 401k. I brightened. Really? She nodded. Your piece on target date funds made me switch from the default 2050 fund to a more aggressive allocation. I morning glanced the market swing, and I'm up 4% this quarter. She laughed, tapping the side of her head. Not bad for a barista. Her words warmed me. Maybe Dan was just one voice. I opened my laptop in the cafe and clicked back into my newsletter analytics. Engagement graphs rose like city skylines. Click-throughs on the ETF comparison chart. Downloads of the quick retirement readiness checklist. RSVPs for my upcoming webinar on inflation hedges. I felt the spark return. If a non-finance cohortist like Mia could benefit, maybe my newsletter was more than a hobby. It was a bridge between baffling Wall Street language and everyday people trying to secure their futures. That evening, I sat down to draft issue #5, Beyond Bonds, Diversification Tactics for a Changing Market. Normally, I'd write in the quiet of my tiny home office, but tonight I needed the buzz of the cafe to drive me. I opened a fresh document. Dear Insight and Retirement readers, when I launched this newsletter, my own savings were in confusion. Part boneheaded stock trades, part too cautious cash stashes. I knew a balanced approach was possible, but I didn't know how to build it. So I dove into the research, interviewed experts, and now, if you're like me, you want more than old CDs and fear-driven funds. I outlined 4 actionable novice-friendly strategies: a 60/40ths core satellite model, adding REITs for yield, using tips during inflation spikes, and carving out a fun money bucket to keep joy in the portfolio. I sprinkled in stories: one reader who swapped 10% of her municipal bonds into a global equity index and saw 15 years of compounded growth. Another who used my suggested spreadsheet template to track their debits and ended up paying off $8,000 in high-interest debt. Then I paused. I could have added a passive side note: by the way, if you're seeking certified guidance, consult a professional. But I wanted to double down on my own journey. I typed, I know I'm not a CFP trademark. I'm someone who stumbles, learns, and shares what I find. If you've ever been told you shouldn't play in the markets, or that you're too old, or even you have no financial sense, let this newsletter prove otherwise. Because building wealth isn't a privilege reserved for financiers. It's a story we write together, one email, one action, one small victory at a time. I formatted the final section as a call to action: live Q&A on Thursday, downloadable asset allocation worksheet, and a reminder to forward the newsletter to one friend who needs it. I hit send. The send confirmation popped up: 8,976 subscribers. My phone buzzed within seconds as subscribers forwarded, favorited, and replied. A reply from Sarah in Idaho: I cried reading your debt payoff story. Thank you for making this real. And another from Leo, a new subscriber: I thought finance was too complicated until I read your videos. I'm setting up my IRA this weekend. Each notification was a small chandelier lighting my confidence. Friday dawned with a slender sliver of sunlight cutting through my curtains. I logged into Zoom for the live Q&A, strategies to protect your portfolio when markets dip, and was relieved to find 127 attendees waiting. People unmuted to share their fears about retirement, their confusion over fees, their gratitude that someone spoke their language without jargon. One voice trembled: Claire, I'm 52, and my 401k has lost 30% this year. I'm terrified I'll never retire. I paused, then shared a personal anecdote. My mom had a similar scare in 2008. She shifted 20% into short-term treasuries, then rebalanced over a year. She discovered stocks recovered, and she never panicked again. The woman thanked me, tears in her eyes. I felt that familiar rush. This was why I persisted. After the session, I closed my laptop and leaned back, breath shallow but soul alight. Dan's words echoed less and less as I realized the truth. Having financial sense wasn't innate or certified. It was learned, step by step, with the right guidance and maybe a little empathy from someone who'd been where you were. That afternoon, I returned to the office for my next creative sprint. In the hallway, Dan caught my eye, paused, and sheepishly offered a thumbs up. I got your newsletter this morning, he said quietly. I learned something. Keep doing what you're doing. My chest swelled. Maybe, just maybe, that was the most important subscription of all. Next week, for part 2, I'll dive into the unexpected partnership that grew from Dan's newfound respect, the corporate invite to speak at our firm's retirement planning summit, and how I navigated a sudden spike in subscribers that threatened to overwhelm my solo operation. I'll share the plot twists, the email leak that landed my latest issue in a hacker forum, the reader who launched a fledgling investment club based on my advice, and the day I realized Insight and Retirement had become more than a newsletter. It was a movement. But tonight, I'll savor this quiet victory, the moment I turned a sneer into a subscriber, and proved that sometimes the best financial sense comes from trusting someone who believes you can learn. I watched the blue light of my laptop fade as the office emptied that Friday afternoon. Dan's thumbs up still echoed in my mind, proof that stubborn optimism and honest storytelling could flip a skeptic. But now, a new phase beckoned, turning a modest Kunda session into a full-blown financial wellness movement, and figuring out how to manage growth, unexpected crises, and the thrill of real impact. 1. From skeptic to partner Monday morning, Dan slipped into a conference room where I was finalizing slide decks for our department's upcoming retirement readiness summit. The huge calendar on the wall read December 14th, all hands training day, retirement readiness, 10 a.m. Dan set his coffee down, chestnut brown rim visible, and exhaled. Claire, he began, voice low enough that only I heard. I've been thinking, can I help you with the summit? I know HR's pressed for resources, and your condo went so well, maybe we partner on this. I blinked. The Dan who'd mocked my newsletter was offering to co-host a corporate workshop. You'd join me on stage? I asked, heart racing. He nodded. I've signed up for your subscription, read every issue. I still don't know everything, but I've learned a lot. Let me help translate your concepts into our company's culture. I studied him. No eye roll, no smirk, just earnest curiosity. Absolutely. Let's do it. Over the next 2 days, we co-authored the summit agenda, 4 modules, mindset and metrics, building your nest egg, tax-efficient vehicles, and a live panel with employees sharing real portfolio wins and flubs. Dan took the lead on framing case studies from our own 401k plan, while I mapped out interactive exercises, balance your budget, gamified spreadsheets, and a compound interest speed challenge. Our collaboration felt electric. He brought corporate insights. I brought narrative clarity. I realized that critics, once converted, could become the best allies. 2. The Corporate Retirement Summit, December 14th, dawned with a swirl of holiday decorations and early arrival guests in our auditorium. I paced backstage with Dan. He gave me a quick fist bump. You ready? He asked, voice steady. I nodded. Let's change some lives. At 10 a.m., I launched into our opening module, weaving in the story of my grandmother's CD ladder. She split $5,000 across 5 staggered CDs to smooth interest rates. I clicked to graphs showing yield curves over decades and urged, notice how patience compounds your advantage. After 15 minutes, I introduced Dan for the mindset and metrics segment. He walked on stage with authority, flipping to slides detailing our company's matching contributions and recommended asset allocations by age. He quipped, when Claire told me to dump my default fund, I nearly called HR. Now I'm up 6% this quarter. The room laughed, then leaned in. We transitioned to the live panel, a group of 5 colleagues from various departments, each sharing their retirement lessons. The finance director admitted they'd never met their own plan's vesting schedule. A junior analyst talked about starting an emergency fund late and the teeth gnashing that followed. A single mom explained how she'd used micro-savings apps to stash away $2,000 in 6 months. Each voice underlined the urgency behind our modules. At the end, I closed with my signature line. Investing isn't a magic trick. It's permission to build a future you believe in. Let's start believing. The ovation that followed felt like a tidal wave, colleagues filing out with renewed determination, HR directors taking notes, and even senior executives lingering for personalized follow-ups. Backstage, Dan and I high-fived, breathless. We did it, he whispered. We did, I echoed. 3. Surging subscribers and server strain. That afternoon, I returned to my desk to find my email inbox flooded, not with work messages, but with newsletter signups. Over 1,200 new subscribers had arrived during the summit. My server logs showed a sudden traffic spike to the subscribe endpoint. Oh no, I muttered, thinking of my humble VPS. Page loading slowed to a crawl. I pinged my developer friend, Ravi. Help, server meltdown. Avail? Within 30 minutes, Ravi had spun up a temporary load balancer, migrated the database to a managed cluster, and configured auto-scaling for the mailing microservice. I watched in awe as the platform's metrics stabilized. I texted the newsletter community Slack. Heads up, massive new subs from today's summit. Please bear with me if the site's slow. Within minutes, replies flooded in. Just signed up, excited. Great session, and most touchingly, from Dan, I'll handle the sub queue if you need backup. That night, I recorded a quick site update video for subscribers, explaining the glitch, thanking them for patience, and teasing issue, #6 on retirement portfolio, rebalancing 101. They responded with virtual applause emojis and words of encouragement. The crisis had become a community victory. 4. The Hacker Forum leak. On the second day after the summit, I received a cryptic email from an unfamiliar address. We found your issue 5 PDF on an anonymous file sharing site, publicly accessible. Just letting you know. My stomach nodded. I clicked the link. Indeed, issue #5's PDF was there. Unprotected, downloaded by who knows how many strangers, perhaps even edited or repackaged by unscrupulous profiteers. My newsletter, once a subscriber-only domain, was now public domain fodder. I convened a crisis meeting with Ravi and my legal counsel, Nadia. We discussed takedown notices, DMCA requests, and watermarking future PDFs. But beyond legal recourse, I felt vulnerable. My curated content spilled into the wild, untethered from my brand. That evening, I penned an open letter to subscribers. Dear readers, last night, I discovered issue #5 circulating on public forums without authorization. I'm sorry for this breach. To protect your experience, I'm implementing watermarked PDFs, requiring unique subscriber tokens, and encrypting future downloads. Your trust means everything to me. Thank you for being part of this journey. Warmly, Claire. The next morning, I found my inbox filled with messages of solidarity. Subscribers offering to use their own tech resources to secure the site. A few even volunteering to help monitor pirate upload sites. One longtime reader, Henry, wrote, "I first subscribed because you made finance approachable. Now I'll fight piracy with you." I felt moved. My community wasn't just reading my words, they were defending them. 5. The Investment Club emerges by January. One of the most remarkable developments emerged from our summit alumni. A group of 10 employees had met virtually to form the Retirement Readiness Club, using my newsletter as their curriculum. They organized weekly video calls to review new issues, compare portfolio allocations, and invite guest experts. One call even featured Dan, in a surprise cameo, explaining the company's 401k match strategy. I was invited to their February meeting as an honorary moderator. As I joined the Zoom grid, I saw familiar faces, some from the summit panel, others entirely new. They greeted me with warm smiles and said they'd already collectively redirected $50,000 into index funds. One member, Latoya, shared, "I was 48, had $10K in a checking account. Your newsletter taught me about dollar cost averaging. Now I've automated $500 monthly into the S&P. I feel hopeful." Another, Carlos, chimed in, "I've been able to help my aging parents set up a trust, something I never knew how to approach until Claire's guide on tax-efficient vehicles." I sat back, heart racing. This was real impact, people applying the lessons in their lives, not just clicking open. At the end of the call, Dan pitched next month's topic, alternative assets for diversification, and the group cheered. I realized the newsletter had transformed from static content into a living, breathing movement. 6. Balancing growth and integrity as subscribers hit 12,000. I face new decisions: hire staff, monetize more deeply, expand content formats, or maintain scrappy independence. I realized that every growth tactic carried risks. The newsletter's soul could be diluted by ads or paywalls. I consulted June, my roommate, who'd watched me juggle code, content, and community burnout. "We need guardrails," she advised. "Offer a premium tier, more detailed reports, one-on-one coaching, but keep core content free. And bring on a part-time editor or community manager so you don't drown." I drafted a roadmap: free tier, weekly newsletter, archived issues, basic webinar access. Premium tier $10/month, deep dive reports, quarterly portfolio reviews, exclusive case studies. Community forum $5/month aggregate, a moderated Slack with channels for newbies, advanced investors, and the retirees circle. I shared the plan with the community Slack and was met with enthusiastic support, especially the idea of tiered pricing to sustain operations. 7. The unexpected invitation then. In mid-February, I received a surprising email from a major financial media company. "Your approach to personal finance is fresh and in demand. Would you consider co-hosting a podcast on retirement strategies? We'd love to discuss terms." My mind spun. A podcast could amplify insight and retirement exponentially, but also siphon time from my core newsletter. I forwarded the email to Dan in June. "Thoughts?" I asked. Dan texted back, "If you love storytelling, but keep creative control." June replied, "This could fund your tech upgrades and watermarks. Explore." After a whirlwind call with the media company, I negotiated creative rights, a limited season of 10 episodes, and a revenue share model that funneled back into watermarks and community events. With Dan's help, I lined up guests from our investment club, a retirement planner, and a behavioral economist. The podcast launched in March. To rave reviews within 2 weeks, it hit the top 100 in personal finance on Apple Podcasts. 8. The community-driven roadmap, by spring, Insight and Retirement, had grown into a full ecosystem: free newsletter, premium community, live Q&As, a podcast series, and corporate workshops with Dan. I hired 2 contractors, a community manager named Priya and an editor named Miguel, to sustain quality. We launched an online retirement expo in June featuring vendor demos, financial planning booths, and mini masterclasses on topics from tax loss harvesting to Social Security optimization. At the expo, I watched attendees clutch printed cheat sheets, huddle around virtual reality demos of retirement living scenarios, and booth hop between sponsors I'd personally vetted for integrity. Dan moderated the midday panel on corporate benefits you didn't know you had, earning him a hero's welcome from colleagues. That evening, Marcus, whose firm had quietly subscribed to the newsletter for every partner, sent me a message: "You created something beyond expectations. Proud of you." I closed the expo's final session and looked out at the crowd, refreshingly diverse in age, profession, and background, all there because they'd believed that financial sense could be learned, not inherited. As I close this chapter, I'm humbled by the journey from being told I lacked financial sense to leading a multi-platform movement for investing and retirement. Daniel's transformation from skeptic to partner, the server crash that tested our resilience, the hacker forum leak that tested our integrity, and the investment club that tested our community bonds, all have been crucibles forging insight and retirement into something real. Part 3 lies ahead, exploring international expansion, launching a community-owned microfund, and navigating the inevitable regulatory labyrinth while keeping the heart and soul intact. Because underlying every spreadsheet, every portfolio, every subscriber is a human story, someone's hopes for the future. And as long as I keep listening and learning, I'll keep proving that financial sense isn't a gift, it's a shared journey.